Hey, it's Courtney Barriger, your host of Environmental Style Now, the A to Z podcast on all that is sustainable fashion. And on this episode of ES Now, I'm with a special guest, Marc Cortez. He is the author of Climaturity, The Journey into the Muddy Climate Middle. Hey, I'm Courtney Barriger, and this is ES Now. My guest today, Marc Cortez, is here to talk about his recently published book, Climaturity. Marc is an entrepreneur, a professor, a longtime veteran of the solar, electric vehicle, and energy storage industries. He's raised over $23 million for multiple startups and is currently the founder and CEO of Liquid 8, a water conservation startup. Mr. Cortez is also a professor of entrepreneurship and technology commercialization at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Let's jump right in.
You wrote a fascinating book called Climaturity, and it's a journey to the muddy climate middle. So
yeah,
what is the climate middle, and what is this all about? I love the title, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. I think the middle is anywhere somewhere between the two polar extremes. And so if you've spent any time in the climate, with any interest in the climate, there's just the two polar opposites. And, on one hand is the there's nothing to see here. Don't open the curtain. There's no issue at all. And then on the other hand is we're all going to be dead by Thursday. And and most of us live somewhere in between, and I certainly do. I sold my first solar module in 1999, so I've spent decades in renewable energy, and I'm a fan, I'm a proponent, and I believe that it has a place. But it's certainly not going to save the planet. And while I like it, I think the whole narrative of we either have to choose between our impending death or complete ignorance. There's this huge valley, and it's born out of my own experience in working in the field. It's born out of it really drove it home when I was working with college students here at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. You've got 20 to 25-year-old young adults heading off into the world after having consumed this steady diet of climate apocalypse. And they're literally thinking that they're not going to be able to have kids. And I scratching my head, I'm like, man, that was so not the message that we started off this industry with. So I take it personally to try to say, well, there's probably some rational. Most of us think rationally towards the middle anyway about some of this stuff. And boy, it's just time to have that dialogue. And that's what kind of inspired me to. I didn't go out and intend to write a book. I started. Just having these discussions with students and also some on social media. And then at some point I said, you know what, I'm getting a lot of positive feedback about this. So let's see if, let's craft a narrative and try to put the whole thing together and put it out there.
How do you bring some of the students that have just gone to the dark side back to the middle ground?
Maybe it's the dad in me that a little bit, which is, we're just not dying. And, look, the good news, and I point out that, one of the things that has been really encouraging for me is, 20 to 25-year-old college students who are just entering the workforce, they're the answer, right? They're dedicated, they're smart, they're committed. I love working with them. And so I just point that to them. I said, look, you know how problems get solved? By you. You solve the problems. And the first thing you do is, don't listen. Okay, I know you've been listening to your parents your whole life. You've been listening to professors and teachers. I teach entrepreneurship. So I teach students to think for yourselves, right? Call BS when you see it. Trust your instincts. So the way that's my approach to this. If you're hearing stuff that just doesn't sound right, raise your hand, question it. Have the dialogue. We're not going to solve anything without being able to talk about it. And, be willing to dig into it. Don't be afraid of the problem because, climate is a big problem. But don't be afraid of it. And so that's what I tell them. I'm like, don't, stop listening to your parents, stop listening to us, and really dig into it with your own thoughts and opinions, and attack it with all the skills that you've been perfecting throughout your college career.
Do you feel like for these kids they're mostly going to school for environmental sciences, I'm guessing, or entrepreneurship,
it's a whole mix. It's engineers, to liberal arts, some study poetry, right? So it's a full mix. It's fantastic, actually.
How would you apply this concept of like, okay, taking it to the middle ground to fashion designers and people that are really, really into the sustainable fashion industry? Because there are some extremes there too. There's a lot of denial, and then there's a lot of like, oh my God, we're all gonna be completely made out of plastic in 2 years.
Yeah, right. I think my advice to everyone, and this is a hard thing, and this is why I say the climate middle is not for the faint of heart. But I say own it. So fashion, right? I mean, people will love to come at you from fashion, right? Like if I could just see it being a lightning rod for criticism, climate criticism. And I say own it, right? I mean, it starts with caring, and caring goes a lot way, but genuine caring, right? So you're genuinely caring that the impact that you have with your business in fashion has, sustainability, and that you want to lower your footprint. So you care. Start by that, and then own the solution. I say one of the challenges that businesses have in particular is that there is such this should factor, right? There's a whole list of things that you should be doing, and if you don't, then you're just going to get shamed, right? If you don't do them. Well, there's so many of those that I just sit there and just throw out the window. It's like, no, they're not going to work, right? The only reason people are doing it is because so they don't get yelled at. So my thing is own the solution. So one thing I noticed when going through some of your things is plant a tree, right? Well, hell yes, plant a tree, right? What could be better? What couldn't be better? So you are you care. You're committing to actually planting a tree and actually removing some of the impact that you have. So I say own it and commit to it, and then be willing to sort of stand your ground. So again, in the middle, I say you're not going to have anyone that's going to love it, right? Because you're going to have the people on both sides that are coming at you saying, come be more extreme like the rest of us. So I say resist that as much as you can, and try to use your own values and your own voice, and just own it. Just be willing to stand up and say, I know I read this in this media site, all these things that I'm going to do, but I'm going to do this, and here's why, and then I'm going to own it, and then I'm going to be willing to defend it.
Thank you for taking a look at my site. You would be surprised, actually, that I have had criticism for planting trees because
I believe it.
Because some people believe that, okay, just offsetting carbon is not enough. We should be just making things that don't have any offsetting at all. But at this present moment, there's no way that you can produce something without having some sort of residue or leftover that just isn't, it's not possible. You can't,
there's no such thing as zero carbon energy. It doesn't exist. It's fiction. So again, I take some responsibility for some of this because I was a marketing guy early on in the solar business. So a lot of these terms I helped commercialize, get them out there because it sounds nice, right? Clean energy, zero carbon energy. There is no such thing, right? Physics, right? There's just this thing called physics, this pesky thing called physics and gravity and all that stuff. So there is no such thing as a zero carbon energy. It doesn't exist. People hate to hear this, but the lowest footprint of energy is nuclear. I know it's it's a 4-letter word, but it's true. So anytime you're using energy, anytime you're putting more energy out into the field, you're increasing the CO2 footprint. It's just a fact. Trees actually remove it. So I would say, I come from the solar business and I have these fights with people every day saying, solar is going to do this, solar is going to do that. And I'm like, no, it's not, because you're adding CO2. Every time you make something and deploy it, you're making the problem worse. And making something less worse doesn't mean you're making it better. Right? So planting a tree actually makes it better. Planting a tree actually removes CO2. It's not just lessening the damage you're doing, it's actually removing the damage that you're doing. I tip my hat to you in doing that, because you don't have to do it, right? I mean, it was thoughtful. It's a thoughtful way to do it. And like you said, you get criticism for doing it, because you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. People will assume that because you're in fashion that you just don't give a damn, and that's just not true.
It's so true. What are some in the publication of your book, Climaturity, what are some like myths and conversations that you've had that have surprised you as you've kind of gone along?
Well, that was the one that we were just talking about is there's these, we created all these terms that have sort of taken on their own meaning, but they have no basis in reality. There's no such thing as zero carbon energy. There just isn't. It's a construct. It's just a made up thing. And, so the idea that, you install solar and then it replaces all this bad stuff. Well, maybe, there's all these variables. And so we in solar, when we first did this, we had no intention that this was going to be used, like the Bible and replacement and all this kind of stuff. We were just trying to give people, hey, if you do this, it's relatively better, and it's actually pretty good. You're lessening the damage that you cause. But we had no idea that people were going to take that and say, if you don't do this, you're going to kill everybody. And that's just the extreme. So, right. So the terminology has been one thing, it's gone to the extreme. People talk about emissions and all of these things, emissions growth and zero carbon and decarbonization. And it's a bit of craziness in my opinion. I mean, let's be honest about this. Fossil fuels, we all use them. We're using them right now. I'm not an oil guy by any means. I don't think that we should be using more of them, but it takes a lot of that in order to make this energy transition. All of our lives are based on it. So I don't know anyone who's given up fossil fuels. I don't know one person, not one person.
Leonardo DiCaprio. I mean, he's taking his private jets everywhere and getting on his fancy yachts and like.
Right, and I personally don't care. Right, I'm not going to moralize. It's like it's lifted us out. It's brought humanity out of the caves, and that's just a fact. So I don't care about it. Where I kind of get stuck in my throat a little bit is when people say, well, if you don't do that now, then you're killing children, and then my hair gets up a little bit. So these are some of the things that I learned in writing this book. And again, you don't do this because you're trying to make friends. In fact, it's the opposite. People that I've worked with a lot really are upset. It's like, it's like, no, you can't actually tell people the complete truth. They might not buy our stuff. Okay, at some point, if we really want to make progress, and I believe that we can solve this. I believe it's an important problem. I've never once denied that it exists. And I think that the only way that we're going to solve this is by doing exactly what you and I are doing now, which is we just got to talk about it. We just can't be so afraid of it. We're not killing each other. There's 8 billion people on the planet. Yes, we know that we're stressing the planet's resources. Let's be honest about it. Let's tell the truth and work together to solve it. I believe that we can. I still believe that. Hopefully it's not naive thinking. So that's been part of this journey.
It's so interesting. Do you remember before the pandemic, the news cycle? I swear to God, every single thing in the news cycle was an environmental catastrophe. Everything was, the polar bear is stuck on a little piece of iceberg that's just kind of floating around, and like, I almost, and it sounds crazy because this is like the middle ground here, but like I was almost a little relieved, even working in the sustainability industry, to not be looking at that all of the time as much. And it's still being something that's like on my plate and something that I'm committed to, but just like not in my face every day.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, here's what no one's telling us about the polar bears is that there's actually a lot more of them now than there were 20 years ago. So it's been successful. So look, does anyone want to hurt polar bears? No, right? I mean, the only people who want to hurt polar bears are in Alaska when they're breaking into their kitchen, to steal their food. So, I mean, this is sort of this weird argument, right? No one wants to hurt polar bears. But suddenly you don't hear about them anymore. And the reason you don't hear about them anymore is, hey, guess what? They're actually doing quite well. Thank you very much. Their populations are increasing. So, back to maybe a previous question, on the polar bears and, the question about science and what's proven and what do we know and what don't we know. So I'm the first to say I'm not a climate scientist. I'm an engineer and I've spent decades in this field, but I don't do primary research, but I've been reading it for decades. And, one of the interesting things that happens is people will sort of throw the science card and say, well, science is proving it. And well, what they didn't tell you is that we've invented these new sorts of science. So when most people think of science, when I think of science, I think about people proving stuff, right? They measure it, they observe it, they go, this is what happened. I can actually measure this, like when we do with temperatures. Things like that. Well, we've morphed that because now we take that and we take those measurements and then we stick them into these models that all try to guess the future. And there's literally thousands of these models that we're just playing what if games with them, and they're designed exactly for that. They're super useful, but they're by no means fact. There's not we take some temperatures, we take some measurements, we stick them in, we make 30, 40 guesses and we hit enter, and then it comes up with answers. And so interesting that, so there's these new forms of science that no one talks about, right? So there's the stuff that is proven in labs that we all think of. Then there's these models that we use that are all made up. And now there's this new thing called attribution science, which is nothing more than pin the tail on the climate donkey. And it was invented by lawyers trying to sue oil companies for polluting. So they've started this whole new thing called attribution science. So if something bad happens in nature, these scientists go around and they use probability and mathematics and equations to try to loop them together. And they say, there's a 63.4% chance that tree falling was because of the cars being driven in India, right? And so it just gets mashed together to the point of we just don't know what's true or what's not true, and that adds to the confusion.
See, I remember, it might have even been 5 years ago now, where they said we have hit the mark, but we cannot return.
Right.
The carbon mark, and I just remember even then thinking, where did this number come from? How did they come up with this number? And no one ever explained it to me. And there was a panic. I had panic for like maybe in 2 months. Just I was super depressed and just like, what do we do? Do I have children? My partner at the time was like, we're not having kids anymore. And so you're telling me this is all just like made up on some guesstimation?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, there's a term for that. It's eco-anxiety, right? We had to invent a new disease because of what we have done to people. And this is part of what inspired me. I just find, look, I'm a dad. Again, I work with students. I find that just reprehensible. I don't know of any other industry that tries to scare children. They try to scare people. I've seen the blueprints. Like, these are marketing people that have put these together. Here's how you are supposed to label people who don't believe in you, the same thing that you do. I mean, I'll go extreme here. The only thing I've seen that are comparable to this are what we did in the Holocaust, right? Where they actually produced documents that said, here's how you're supposed to denigrate other people. We do that in the climate. There's blueprints. Columbia University published it. They sent it out to all the media outlets. Here's how you are supposed to label people who don't believe what you believe. So I find that just shocking, and so I fight it with every fiber that I have. So eco-anxiety it's a real thing, and you're not the only one, and it's endemic now. We're just having to fight that, but it's because we created all these different scenarios. There are literally 1,184 of them, I think, these different scenarios that all the climate planning people and analysts have have put out there, and now which of those are real? They're all fiction. They're all just made up. But which one are you going to believe? Well, so it's an editorial choice, right? So the newspapers say, you know what, I'm going to pick this one, and the one that most people have picked, the most folks have picked, have been the most extreme. So the most extreme is, here's we're going to die, we're going to do this, and look, it ticks a lot of boxes, right? It's politicians love it because it helps scare people into paying for solutions that maybe that we don't need,
that maybe don't even work. We're not even sure.
That don't even work. That's also one of my bugaboos is a tree is way more powerful than solar modules in helping actually normalize the planet. And so, but no one's incentivizing us to go out and plant some trees.
Ridiculous. I'm actually working on a book right now as well, and it's a workbook. And when I first started writing it, I realized it was just a doom and gloom situation that I was like, it wasn't a workbook to begin with. It was like, oh, 1 in 6 people work in the fashion industry and they're all not getting paid enough money to live. And all these things where you're like, oh my God, what do I do? But I turned it into a workbook, and I have a whole chapter on naysayers. And when I was writing it, it's interesting talking to you about this, because what I found was that the best thing to say to someone who's like actually, I would like to ask you, what's the best thing to say to someone who's in the far category of this doesn't exist, this isn't real? Because what I came up with was like, basically, like, you don't even have to change your entire life. You just have to change 30% of your life, because that's a tipping point. Well, 33% is a tipping point. So that was something that I grabbed a hold of. I would love to hear what you would have to say to the complete opposite, the naysayers and that group of people.
Yeah, it's tough. I think I've learned, and this is just, you're not going to convert someone who is a firm believer, right? So the folks who are believing that there's nothing going on here, you just have to say, okay, I get it, but I won't be able to convince them that there is a problem that they just in their heart and soul don't believe. You point to the data, I'll say, look, we know that, yes, maybe we can't prove all of this stuff, but there's lots of indications from really smart people who are saying we're doing some damage. 8 billion people on the planet. We know we're stressing resources. Most people agree with that completely. On the other hand, what I do with folks who are saying, oh my God, we have to change our entire society or we're going to be dead because of the climate. I say, well, have you given up fossil fuels? Have you stopped? And they go, well, I can't. I'm like, well, what do you mean you can't? Of course you can. You can make the choice. You could sell everything. You could get rid of everything. You could get rid of all your possessions. You can pull your kids out of school. You can completely make the choice to change your lifestyle and go live to your values. So until that happens, it's come on. I mean, right? So I always say, I'm like, I hear you clamoring for everyone to give up fossil fuels. You first. Right? You first, right? I mean, don't get into your Tesla. Don't do all that stuff. Don't get in your car. Sell your stuff. Quit your job. Get cash. Drive up and live in a yurt up in the mountains. Okay, you're committed. I believe you. But when Joe Biden looks at the camera and says, we got to get rid of fossil fuels, then boards Air Force One to go to a conference in Glasgow that he could have just Zoom called it like you and I are doing. Come on, man. Or like you talked about Leonardo DiCaprio, right? I love the movie that he made. Fantastic. The yacht that he rents for the summer has 365,000 gallons of fuel in his yacht, right? How can you sit there and stare at us and say, we got to give up fossil fuels? I mean, come on. So to me, in my opinion, this is why we're not making more progress, because we can smell that a mile away, right? So we talked about your brand, consistency. You're in the fashion industry, could be a lightning rod for people to criticize you, and they have, but you do stuff, right? And so own it. And so, to hell with you people, this is what I'm doing. What are you doing? Don't have it be somewhere else in these big international meeting minutes. Don't have the plan be, let's change the world before I'm willing to change. No, if you truly believe this, if you believe fossil fuels are the scourge of the earth, then get together all of your best buddies and have a big fossil fuel giving up party and give it all up, right? I would have full respect for that. But until that happens, no, just no.
That's crazy. So I took a look at Liquid 8. So tell me more about this company that you co-founded. How does it work?
Yeah, so I borrowed that. I'm in California, and so we live, with the drought is a way of life for us, and it has been, and it always will be. And so, again, it goes back to, we all believe that there's a drought. We read about it, but now we're actually doing something about it, right? Now the government's involved, and there's restrictions. So, okay, we all take this seriously. So I borrowed some concepts from the renewable energy market with carbon credits and things like that, where these are these financial fungible goods where Liquidate, we're just going to do what we do in the voluntary carbon market, which is we're going to, on one hand, we're going to incentivize homes and businesses to save water. So we will monitor their systems. We'll show them the water that they're using. We'll help put programs in place to help them save water. We'll capture those savings and say, hey, you've saved 100 gallons, on this day, and then we will put those into a marketplace and offer those up for sale for companies who have water neutral goals. Okay, get back to the beginning of our conversation, and there's plenty of them, big, huge public companies that said, Coca-Cola, for example, says, for every gallon of water that we use, I'm giving one back, which is a huge claim for a company who sells liquid, right? You can't get there. So the way that you do that is you incentivize other people to do it. So in your community, you have homes and businesses saving water. That goes down. You can buy those credits and use that as a way to offset your water footprint. And so in the fashion industry, or in the we're seeing companies, Levi's and things like that. They have these very broad sustainability goals, and it's a perfect way for them to do that.
It takes over 2,000 gallons for them to make one pair of jeans.
Yeah.
So that's pretty absurd if you think about it.
Yeah, right. And so we'll get criticized for greenwashing and things like that, but my view is sort of the truth will set you free, right? So we can actually prove that water is being saved. We can show it. We can point to the data, and there's nothing wrong with a big corporation like Levi's. I'm picking on Levi's, but why wouldn't it make sense for them to sponsor other people to do this? Isn't that a good thing, actually, that they would actually get involved to help other people and other businesses save water? Isn't that what we're trying to get people to do? So I'm just riding that horse, and so far it's pretty interesting. We're still developing it, but it's a pretty interesting concept, and we're excited about it.
It kind of brings us back to what you said in the beginning. Major corporations who because they have so much influence and so much capital, that not only are they being pressured to take on environmental policies, but they are the ones that actually make the most difference because they are using the most resources to begin with. So it does make sense in every way for these major companies to take this on. Would it make sense for smaller companies to sign up as well?
I think so. I think like what you're doing, it starts by caring about it. Okay, so and it's not a trivial thing, right? If you say, look, we want to be we want to lessen our impact. We want to manage that, and so I say start from the very beginning. Try to do that. There's no reason that you can't just put that out there as goals. You may find that it's difficult to meet them all, but put it out there right from the beginning. Set the strategy, set the culture, set that as a goal right from the beginning. And again, own it. I just say own it. There's so many different ways that this can happen. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You talked about big, huge companies. So Microsoft, everyone knows Microsoft. So I don't have an opinion about Microsoft either way. Before our call, I was yelling at my machine because Windows was taking too long. So that was my opinion about Microsoft. But right, everyone knows that they've got the resources, but they're also, look, they make stuff. They've had a huge CO2 footprint. So they made a commitment to, and they've been very public about this, to not just zero out the damage that they're causing or make the damage that they're causing less. They said, you know what, we're gonna remove all of the carbon that we have put out into the world since 1985, excuse me, 75, since our inception. Now, that got my attention. Now, whether they can do it, how they're going to do it, I don't know. But they put it out there, and they just said, it's not enough for us to just lessen the damage like everyone else is doing, to go zero carbon and take 20 years, because that's just checking a box and gets people off the back. They're actually committing to it. And so whether or not they do it or they follow through on their commitments is a separate thing. But I was like, man, okay, you got my attention. Patagonia, right? They fashion brand, right? I mean, their founder has been very clear about how they want to be sustainable, and he shows angst when you interview him. It's a real personal struggle for him when he gets asked, how do you balance making stuff and using resources and ruining parts of nature to honor nature? How do you do that? And so he's open about that. So I think that's how you do it. I think that's exactly how you do it. You embrace it, you acknowledge it, you're open and honest about what you do, what you don't do. Being anxious and owning the problem and knowing that you haven't solved it yet is genuine. And I think we all do that. So it's way better than just saying there's not a problem, or I'm just going to do what the mob is telling me to do in order to solve this problem. Make it personal and own the solution that it fits your business the best.
Yeah, the fashion industry is so complicated because, I mean, as you know, there's the growing phase where you're cultivating, the cotton or the carbon, all the fossil fuels, and all of that requires water. And then there's the dyeing process and the treatment process of all the different chemicals. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many chemicals go onto just your t-shirt just to make it soft or pliable or waterproof or whatever, and then put it on a ship and transport it across the ocean or on an airplane, on freight, and then you're washing it. I mean, it just requires so much water to make and care for clothes. I just, when I looked at your website, it boggled my mind, because I thought to myself, how would I even begin to plug this into my supply chain? Because I would have to get every single person on my supply chain to agree to agree to sign on. And that's like at least 30 different groups.
Yeah, right. That and you may not be able to do it. Coca-Cola is a good example. They actually tried to do this exact thing with water. They tried to manage this, and of course they just got the hell beat out of them by everyone saying you're greenwashing this, offsets this, offsets that. And they to their credit, they committed to it and they were trying to do it. But what ultimately got them was their supply chain, because they just, they realized that, hey, when all of these products show up on my dock, they have embedded energy in them. They have embedded water. They've had embedded, electricity. They've been shipped all over the world to show up here. I can't legitimately claim zero if they're not zero when they arrive on my dock. So you have the same thing. So, offsets are a good way to do that. And offsets get a bad name because they've been so abused, but there's a way to do that, right? So if a big company can't plant trees, they can sponsor a bunch of other people to plant trees. I mean, there's just absolutely nothing wrong with that. And as long as it's above board and we're open and honest and transparent about it, there's totally a place for that.
Totally. And even say in the fashion industry, if I was able to get one of my suppliers to sign on, and it would have to be transparent, like, okay, one of our suppliers have signed on. It's just like it's the same thing with the fabrics, like not every single one of them has the exact same certifications. Some of them are Ecotech certified, some of them are Tencel, and that has a whole different certification. But it starts to get a little bit muddled, especially for consumers, because like they care, but I don't know if they really, really, really care that much to see like, okay,
Right.
here's a certificate for each thing. I mean,
Right.
I have a page where I go over everything and what's going on there, but you're right. Even if I was to get one group to sign on and say, I think the most important one in this case would probably be, or the most easy one would probably be some of the factories that do the printing and dyeing.
Yeah.
Because that's very traceable versus farming. Like, who knows with the farming? Like, there's no way they're going to keep track of that.
Yeah.
They might, but yeah, that's something for me to think about. I'm inspired.
But if you got one, I mean, I think it's true of a lot of industries, so I suspect it's true in fashion too. But if you got one, imagine how quickly you get the next 50, right? Because if one you say, hey, my one supplier, my printer has just agreed to do this, and it's awesome, right? And imagine everyone else going, well, wait, we need some of that too. We got to get on board with that too, and that's often how it works.
It's almost kind of a social pressure, like, oh wait, you have this, wait, we need that too. Our competitors are more sustainable than us now.
Yeah.
So funny. No, I think that's great though. I think you're right. It's not everything all at once. It's a little bit at a time, and taking the middle ground and just having accountability and doing what you can and being like as transparent and real about it as possible.
Yeah, I think so too. As much as I hate to say this, but one of the best things that happened to the climate in the past 50 years was COVID. And I hate to say that, but it's actually true, because I mean, if you look at the numbers, you're like, wow, in 1 year, the US dropped our emissions by 11%. And in 50 years, they've grown by 10%. So what's wrong with this picture, right? It's like, what happened was people didn't drive as much, they didn't buy as much, they didn't use as much. They actually consumed less and were just more mindful of it. And look what happened. Now, it was painful. You would never want to have this as a way of life, right? But the point is, the climate is a consumption problem. At the core, the climate is a consumption problem. So you can't solve an overconsumption problem with more consumption. It's like trying to get skinny by eating 50 low-calorie donuts instead of 50 regular calorie donuts, right? It's like, okay, I can convince myself that, well, this donut has less calories than this one, so I'm saving, but hey, guess what? You eat 50 donuts, you're going to get fat, right? So it's just like that. So during COVID, we turned stuff off. We didn't go to the office. We Zoomed. We did all this other stuff. And yes, it was painful and it was an unintended consequence, but it actually worked. I looked at that and I'm like, okay, 50 years of aggressive climate policy, billions spent, and we haven't solved the problem. 1 year we did. So what's wrong with this picture? So there's all these things that we can do. Imagine Joe Biden or any president. I'm not going to pick on Biden. Imagine the next international climate saving conference having the U.S. go, hey, guess what? I'm not going to fly on a plane. I'm going to do it Zoom. Maybe you guys should do it too. Think of all the billions of gallons of jet fuel that we wouldn't use. Great, fantastic. Why don't we do that? Stuff like that. So, I think that there's so many things that most of us do this anyway. Most of us who care, we turn lights off, we use less water. We're doing it anyway. We just don't get credit for it. It doesn't make the big press for, who wants to read a story about people turning their dang lights off? Boring. Right?
Not newsworthy, not clickbait.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. Well, I appreciate what you're doing so much. Where can we find your book if we wanted to read it?
Amazon is the best place for it. Climaturity, it's there, or climaturity.com. I actually invented the word just because I couldn't think of another word that describes what I was trying to communicate, and something down the middle and something where most of us can agree to. So those two places, it's available.
That's perfect. Do you have any social media handles or anything like that?
I write quite a bit on LinkedIn, so people can just find me, Marc Cortez, on LinkedIn. Like most things, it's a lightning rod. I was involved in a discussion overnight with some people who, it's just, it's a very volatile place to be. But again, I think you just got to do it and put it out there.
Oh wow, I think we ended up losing Marc right at the end, but a big thank you to him for his efforts on bringing all of the craziness of climate change into a conversation that's a little bit more manageable. So thank you. And if you want to keep up with his book and his work, go ahead and check out his website, www.climaturity.com. And that is Climaturity, CLIMATURITY.com. Thank you for listening, and that's a wrap.
This is Catherine from Jacksonville. Yes, that was a Holding Court production. It is written and directed by Courtney Barriger, music by Parker Ainsworth, and a special thank you to Alexandra Shuck.